Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our conversation with Nyesha Arrington. Thank you so much for tuning in from wherever you may find yourself, whether you are a longstanding member of the modern adventure community or new to us. Really excited for the conversation with Nyesha today. Nyesha, are you there? You can turn your video on now. There she
Hello.
is. Hey.
Hey,
Uh,
hey.
hey. Nyesha joining us from Santa Monica, California. I'm Luis Vargas, the founder and CEO of Modern Adventure, joining you from Portland, Oregon. And I had the pleasure of meeting my dear friend Nyesha in Israel. Back in the days when we used to be able to travel, if you remember how incredible those days were, and that they will soon be coming. But we had a really wonderful experience in Israel, just an intoxicating place with so much history, complexity, and then all of the things. And we were hosted by a wonderful organization, the Schusterman Foundation, with a cohort of really the best and brightest in the culinary space. And it was really, really just a dream. Meeting Nyesha, knew that I'd met a kindred spirit. And a wonderful human. And, since then we've talked about how we could collaborate, which led to us spending this hour with you all, sharing a little bit more about Nyesha and her incredible story. And then also, about an invitation to travel to Morocco with her as well, which we'll touch on. So I'd love to spend, the next hour really kind of exploring your story, Nyesha, from the beginnings of you, growing up in Southern California to, ending up at some of the best kitchens in the world. And within the context of this crazy time that we're living in, with all of the things happening from the pandemic to Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, and just your evolution, as a chef, as a Black Korean woman, as an entrepreneur. There's just so much there, to unpack. So, why don't we start off at the beginning? Just how your spark in cooking got started, and kind of your early days and perspective, from that point of view.
Well, thank you. I want to say it's an honor to have this conversation with you. I'm grateful. And as you said, definitely a kindred spirit and just a very present human being. And I'm very much living in gratitude, being able to share space with everyone here and yourself. So thank you for having me. It's a beautiful day here in lovely Santa Monica. We got some great rain yesterday, so grateful to Mother Nature for that. Actually, it's Mother Nature and the conduit of life that really connects me to the reason why I cook. When I was a little chef, call it 5 or 6 years old, my grandmother would pull me into the kitchen at every moment she had. And today, as an older woman, I reflect back as being that 5-year-old little girl. And I'm very grateful to that matriarch, perspective and energy in my life. It has resonated throughout my grit, my perseverance, my will to be successful, not maybe just financially or monetary, but successful in intent and meaning and purpose. And that for me is food. Food is definitely my love language. And I set out on this journey in 2001. I attended culinary school and I graduated 2003. And I haven't really looked back. It's been a constant pursuit of evolution. I'm definitely one of those people that's wired to want to always have progression in my life, which leans into my style of cooking, which I call progressive California cuisine. And it's food that's very globally inspired. It's food that is rooted in seasonality and global flavors, right? So I really try to tell a story of intent with my cooking, and I love for people to gather at a table and share story and share connection. And for me, there's really no other way to live. I think in a digital age, in a world of tech, these stories and the food and the love that we can transfer in that food to another is what makes us human. So
Mm-hmm.
um, that's
Oh,
what inspires me.
oh, I love that. I love that, Nyesha. And I love the idea of evolution. And I know we share that in common, this idea of continuing to progress, right? And what got us here is not going to get us there. And, continuing to evolve, along every, um, chapter of our journey. And I know very much you've had these chapters, right? From, I think, starting with your grandmother, and having that spark, going to culinary school at the Art Institute of California, and then coming out at a time where, chefing isn't as sort of, I don't know if ubiquitous is the right word, but as sort of pop culture as it is now, right? With the sort of canonization of chefs, you are a Top Chef alumni. It was a different time. Can you share a little bit about that? Coming out of culinary school, so you've made this commitment, you sort of, heard the call and said, I am going to be a chef. But graduating from culinary school, you are trained, but you're not quite yet a chef, right? So, tell us a little bit about that, especially at that moment in time, which I think is very different than I think the way things are today, right?
Yeah, big time, big time. It is a I don't know if burden is the right word. It is a art and a craft that can really grip you. It can really, I'll call it for sake of conversation, the old school chef mentality. It is more than just cooking, right? It's more than stepping into the kitchen and preparing a good dish. Um, it is a lifestyle, right? To don a chef coat, to say I am a chef, right? The reason why I have chef tattooed in my fingers here, it's more than, it's more than, playing chef on TV. It's more than being able to brunoise an onion or small dice or know what a sofrito is. Being a chef, it gave a lot of people who didn't fit in. It gave a place for people to fit in, right? It is a ship, and a lot of times chefs, we're kind of like the outcasts. I feel like chefs are a very certain breed of people, right? Like um, I assimilate it to a kind of like a surgeon or any sort of very meticulous, thoughtful artistry or craft is to be a chef, right? It's more than just to cook food. It's all about sensory, inclusion and taking a lot of the senses and bringing them to life, right? We're artisans and we are able to create intangible thoughts and make them very real, and they become entities that live in the soul of human beings. So chefs have a bad rap sometimes in saying that we're hot-headed, we're egotistical, we're this or that, but it's hard, right? Like unless you walk a mile in the mind of a chef, right? Like when David Chang came out with that show in 2010 or whatever it was, and that was Anthony Bourdain and these guys. Like I feel like they were, for me, my generation, were some of the first people to articulate the chaos, even, right? The art and the chaos of the mind of a chef, right? It's a constant battle of art meets analytical thinking, and the analytical mind is creating this grid and this pattern and ways, and the art brain is like just wants to just riff, and it's, in terms of business, you're kind of always trying to find this equilibrium between both and find self-fulfillment and then also inspire. right? Because I think we're also in the business of people business. We're trying to inspire, and we're also trying to be inspired constantly. It's a push pull. So we are always exuding, right? Many times we're not filling our own buckets. And so, you know, when I was coming up, cutting my teeth on the line, you know, I was, yeah, Michelin starred restaurants, the best. I worked for the best chef, like, you know, Joël Robuchon, the best chef in the world, right? That has the most decorated chef of the century. He'd since passed away. I was in the Virgin Islands when I heard of his death. And it's interesting because we live in a world today where we're all about like instant gratification. And it's so funny because I remember I had so much respect for him when Chef Robuchon, Monsieur Robuchon, would walk in the kitchen. It wasn't like, oh, let me run up to chef and say like, oh, you know, may I take a photo with you? You know, it's a different time. You know, those are relics that live in my mind that a photo couldn't do justice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, it's a different dialogue. To say, you know, these, to your question about a different time, I would walk in, you know, 5 hours before my shift and work for free. Just not even work for free. I was gaining knowledge, right? On paper, I was working for free, but I was there to build my stamina, my staying power, my integrity, my craft, you know, off the clock. And over time, you know, I was like the type of person to say, oh, you know, I've set up my station. Finally, you know, I'm not getting yelled at every day. I'm not, you know, being called whatever names, or, you know, at times, you know, I've saw lots of physical and verbal abuse in all of the fine dining kitchens that I came up in, every single one of them. And it was something that just became very normal, you know. And to this day, I've never been, you know, we're talking about talks of inclusion, we're talking about Me Too movement. I've never regretted my journey, you know, because at the time when I read Kitchen Confidential, when Anthony Bourdain came out with that book, and I think it was like 2005, I was like, wow, it like made my heart skip a beat, because I remember that was the first book that I read cover to cover and then read it right back again. Yeah. And, you know, you know, the first time I met him, he was, for me, like, he was the guy, you know, of my time, and who would just put the words on paper that made me feel like I had already lived that dream.
Yeah.
And, you know, to say that everything came second, I almost speak about that in past tense because I've done the work to find a new light. All of that mattered in my life is perfecting my craft, because it's like a symbiotic relationship. This like thing just gets in your brain and latches onto your soul, and nothing else matters until you can be the best, right? I got to the point where I was setting up my station and working off the clock 8 hours a day, and then setting up the next person's station, setting up the kitchen. And that's how you progress. You know, there's no other way. You're sweeping the kitchen, you're doing all the things just to get noticed, you know, and especially building someone like me, there weren't a lot of people that looked like me. I had to, you know, so. Yeah.
No, I know, you know, you've referenced that. I think this part of your life where, you know, it was certainly not a job. It was a complete lifestyle. I mean, there was no oxygen in the room for anything else. It was that level of commitment, just truly just completely turning yourself over, giving all the chips to the craft. And that was, you know, that was the experience, right? And also, you know, coming out of that and sort of looking around and being like, okay, well now, what other possibility is there, right? As you became a little bit, you know, a little bit in your careers, you know, before we get to that, I think, you know, for us that have never had the experience of being, you know, in some of the world's best kitchens with, you know, such legendary names, I think there's this idea and of just what a compressed, you know, high pressure, you know, environment it is, and just both the tension, the stress, you know, the level of performance and excellence that is demanded at every level, at every day. You know, just share a little bit more of what it is like to live that. And also, I think we've got this idea, certainly kind of portrayed widely in media by people like Gordon Ramsay, of just the in your face, brutal chefs. I'd also, is that something that's starting to evolve, or like, give us a little bit of a sense of what that feels like, and then also, how you see those things kind of evolving right now.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So like an average day of like, call it 10 years ago, 2020, yeah, 15 years ago, this is going to be very raw.
Yeah, please.
And so someone like, right, Nyesha Arrington 15 years ago was the girl, just fairly recently had graduated from high school. I would skateboard to work because, I was going to culinary school and held a full-time job, didn't have a car. And, I come from an extremely blue collar family. And so I didn't have the means for much. And I remember I set a path of intention, and that's all that mattered. When I found my craft, cooking, I leaned in, without question, and nothing else was going to stand in my way. Not in a way of like anger or any, that's who I am. I could have picked anything. I could have picked whatever, being a makeup artist, and I probably would have put the same intention and thoughtfulness into that, right? So that's just how I like to live my life. That's how my upbringing was. I had great parents who instilled a very insurmountable amount of work ethic in me, and I'm very grateful for that. But when I would walk into these kitchens, the first kitchen I ever walked into was a 3-story kitchen. This was a restaurant called Giraffe. It was on Santa Monica and 7th Street. It was French fine dining bistro. And I remember my culinary school had tasked me to write a paper. And this was an amazing human being. She was my French teacher, French language. Her father was a chef, and she was my sociology teacher and my French language teacher, whose father was a chef. So she understood me completely, right? And so she tasked us with the task to eat alone in a restaurant. So I ate in this restaurant, loved it so much, I said, I'm going to intern here. So I'd work there for free when I had time on the weekends and during culinary school. So I remember the first day I walked into that kitchen, they said, here's this case of bell peppers. And I had to brunoise, which is like the tiniest, most perfect small dice, 1/8 of an inch by 1/8 of an inch, cubed. And so it took me like 6 hours to like cut this entire box of bell peppers. And I remember I didn't want to take a break. I was the only girl in the kitchen. I was scared all of the time. It was like there's one other female. She was in pastry like all the time. And all the guys were like, I'm just going to speak freely.
Yeah,
I'd be afraid to like walk down the line because, someone might touch me or grab my side or graze my butt or, say, hey, whatever, say whatever. And like, I had to, like, in hindsight of thinking about these things, it's like, wow, that was like really intense. Yeah. But, and so, it was every day, and that happened for like 10 years straight. So, at different varying levels of, life experience. And so, next kitchen, it's pretty much same stuff. And it got to this point where I feel like consciously, as I'm putting myself in that place, I remember, you wake up, set yourself up for the day. And I remember walking through the, gate of the back door of the kitchen, and I would consciously like check myself there and walk in and just beast, and be a different person, burn my arms, lift like gigantic stock pots, half my size, like just fucking working, man, making sure I had the sharpest kitchen and the sharpest knife in the kitchen. I was always the last person to leave. And I was a ninja. Like I don't I don't know how else to say. I just,
Gladiator. Yeah.
yeah, a gladiator, 100%. And
Yeah.
like, and not, and I, and in a constant battle of like, how can I pursue my craft? How can I perfect my craft and still be a nice person? How can I still be respected? Because in the fine dining world, to push down another person is to lift yourself up. That is the equation.
Mm.
The chef sees you berating someone else, whatever, that's good. That's celebrated.
Yeah.
It's like hard. And so I know a lot of times it conflicted with my personal morals and
Mhm.
values, So I saw people get slapped in the face. I saw people get burned. I saw, so and so forgets lemon in the dish. The chef's over there squeezing a lemon over that person's head. Dish wasn't hot enough. Spoon goes in the fryer, and I'm gonna tap you with this spoon. So like weird
Yeah.
things that where it's like
Yeah.
I don't know how to communicate what I need, and it's such a high pressure environment, right? Like I've seen some crazy shit, really crazy shit, man. And a lot of physical abuse. I've seen like saute pans get thrown down the line and hit this guy in the shin. He's like, oh, like still trying to cook, and like
Mhm.
we're working for these people, and willingly and saying almost like, yes, chef, may I have another, and it's like, it's interesting. It's interesting. It's very interesting. I remember seeing this older gentleman, go to the dining room, cut the lamb on a gueridon the wrong way. The chef sees the lamb come back. He looks at the lamb, and like there's a deafening silence. And he literally picks up his hand and backhands him across the face.
Wow.
Like, and just berates him in front of the kitchen, and everyone's just
Yeah.
like goes back to shopping, like stuff, it's just a lot, and
Yeah,
now
it's a
the
lot of a
days
lot,
have,
right?
yeah,
No, and it's
yeah.
interesting, as our thinking evolves, right, around the culture of like of performance, right? Of like, how do you bring out great performance? And clearly, the top restaurants in the world, frankly, or a company or a sports team, like almost agnostic to it. Like, how do you get the best out of people? And there's definitely this idea of a culture of fear. Like, there's just such an acute fear of fucking up that, and this other idea that you have this really big line of people that'll come and take your job instantly because it's so heralded. So there's these dynamics of play. But being the optimist that I am, I think there is some evolution, right? There is some thinking around. I mean, certainly, I think people like Daniela Soto-Inez, I think, is kind of on the vanguard of saying, look, a happy kitchen is not incongruent with a world-class kitchen, and if you treat your people well, then you can have a great outcome, right? I mean, how have you seen this evolution? Is it a state in flux? Is it still like sort of an old guard and the new guard? Like, how do you think about like where things are today?
My honest answer is it is in flux. I think we're recognizing it because once we saw Anthony Bourdain pass, we're talking about these mental health issues, we're talking about drug and alcohol abuse, we're talking about very unhealthy ways to cope and find self-therapy in this field where you're going extreme on one side of the spectrum. So we're trying to fix ourselves because you give so much. It's relentless. It is relentless. And so to find success, right, and success is dictated by the person, right? And that's a blanket statement of success, like, but no, I think it's an influx. I've sat on many panel discussions with many world-renowned chefs, and we always talk about how do we get to a place where our industry is healthy, because it's rampant,
Yeah.
drug and alcohol abuse, and we're trying, I think. And so I think it's a push-pull because we deal with such small margins, right? Our
Mhm.
guests want to have value in their guest experience, in their food, in their dining experience, and we're trying to save a penny. We're trying to save leak tops and make leak dust because we know that can't go in the trash. We're trying to make stock and all these things to try to pass the value on to the guest. But then that's also applying so much pressure in so many areas. And I use that just as an example that emanates into such a larger conversation. But I think ultimately the recipe, the proverbial recipe, needs to change for business, because it's hard, man. Because I think it ultimately comes down to buying power. Because when we're looking at, you know, cost of goods versus revenue, the equation just doesn't add up. The burden a lot of times doesn't really outweigh the reward, you know?
Absolutely. Well, and the pandemic is showing that, right? I mean, rent alone, right? I mean, it just doesn't pencil, you know, it just doesn't pencil.
It just doesn't, man. So, you know, I say that we're in flux because I want to say, you know, the optimist in me as well, it's like you, wants to say, oh, you know, we're doing great and we're heading to a great place of mental health and wellness and all of these things. As I've personally taken on that journey for myself, you know, I had to do that for Nyesha. But, you know, through the Black Lives Matter movement, through Me Too movement, through this last year, I've had more conversations with chefs in the industry worldwide, globally, than I have in my entire career. And, you know, in speaking very transparent, there are a few friends that I had to let go, you know, because I'm always been a very sensitive, empathetic person. Like, I'm very porous in my spirit, but I wear warrior armor. So it's hard, right? Like when a chef friend calls me up and says, oh, you know, my staff is so sensitive, and, you know, oh, I said this joke and it's about this Black person, blah, blah. And it's like, it's a joke. And it's like, yeah, but like, who's it funny to, you know? Who's it funny to? Like, is it funny to you? Because in all honesty, this is not the first time I've, you know, heard this conversation. And so I think we need to do a lot of unraveling from a very systemic place, because it's hard, you know?
It's really hard. You know, we have a great question just came in, and it says, you know, what can we do as diners to help transform the dining industry into a healthier system? You know, like what role, you know, do we can we play in doing that?
Yeah, well, I thank you for that question, you know, and I love that question because it makes us feel like we're not alone, you know, like we don't have to have the answers and come up with all these different business plans and try to keep pivoting because it's exhausting, you know, and some of that responsibility could pass on to the diner. And in all honesty, a lot of my friends have been asking me that. And, you know, and I go back to my associates and ask people in the industry what that could look like as well. And ultimately, you know, I think in my humble opinion, you know, when I look at how can we save to pass on the value, I think we need to look at our purchasing systems. I think that when we have better buying power, right? This is why we have monopolies like McDonald's and all these fast food companies who can offer a burger for $2 or whatever, because they have extremely large buying power, right? They have their own farms that are making the GMO tomato that's going to come out the same way. We don't have that. We're buying tomatoes from Susan down the street, who's feeding her 4 kids and her husband, who she's taking care of, and charging $8 for the case of tomato, but it's the most best tomato. So I think when we can take those ideologies of big business, right, franchises, and implement our own smaller communities within the restaurant community, you know, we have 10 restaurants on a block who say, we're buying 5 pallets of this, and then we're dispersing it into our community, restaurant community. That comes down to menu planning, then it comes down to staffing. And that's where I think we can develop systems. I think it's hard when we're talking about small businesses, mom and pop shops. It's like everyone's operating under we're all doing the same thing, you know, this restaurant and this restaurant and this restaurant, we're all doing the same thing. But how do we build a system that all works together? I think that's where we can see some change. You know, is that realistic? I don't think across the board, because everyone's menu is different, right? But I think on commodity goods, like maybe that would help, you know, bring dollars to the bottom line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something else I wanted to touch on is, which is such an interesting time to be thinking about our identity, right? About around how we move through the world, and, thinking about your identity as a chef, an entrepreneur, as a Black woman, as Korean. How has that, played a role kind of in your life, and how you identify and how you move through the world, and in the lens of the context of the days that we're living, and both I think, the opportunity and lack thereof, right? Because it can go both ways, and then also, in some regard, some of the responsibilities as well. I know it's
Yeah.
something you think a lot about.
No, I thank you for that question. It's something I've grappled with because super transparent answer. I think the first PR piece that someone came to me and said, this is, my first chef job, right? My first chef de cuisine job, 2008. And I did my first talk with a PR person. She's like, oh, we're going to tell your story and you need a bio and all these things. And I'm like, I don't know this world. I'm just a chef. Like, did it food, media, none of that stuff. I was like, I cook, I am a robot, like, and she's like, oh, you're part Korean. That's interesting. So the media has always pushed me to, oh, you're Korean grandmother, you're Korean, great. I have dark skin, like I identify as a Black woman. And I also celebrate my Korean heritage, of course, right? Which is an extremely personal thing to me. And I'll have to be honest, right? Sitting here today and having done the work, having peeled back the layers, I rebelled against being like Nyesha Arrington, the Black chef, because the media and people, society, I always want to put you in this box and say like, oh, she's Black, so she should cook soul food, or she, oh, you don't have a fried chicken on the menu. And I'm like just speaking super, it's just like, no, and in culinary school, it's like French is the way. And it's like, it's hard, man, because it's like, okay, you go to culinary school, all they teach you is like the French system, and that's the way. So in my mind, okay, this is what you learn. I'm going to go all the way, so, that's what I did. And I worked in the fine dining. I learned the brigade system. I learned white tablecloth. I learned, I went to the Boku store. I did all these things because I am a warrior, but I think now in terms of what is my identity, who am I, what do I have to offer, what is my legacy, definitely asking these questions myself a lot more these days, because I will open another restaurant again. I will never be disenchanted with the food business because I have an insatiable thirst to nurture other people and in turn be nurtured,
Mm-hmm.
So that is the driving force behind my craft.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my food today, I'm thinking, what resonates with people? Who am I? So I'll be honest, I've definitely leaned in more to my father's side, who's African-American, roots in Mississippi, second generation Angelino, born and raised in Los Angeles. My grandmother cooked for the famed Doheny family as their chef. And my dad was just telling me these most amazing stories about my grandmother. And I don't know if it was just falling on like new ears because I've had time to have bandwidth in my mindset to listen more, and not just be so honed in on my craft and like, just a lot of fog around, kind of losing myself as a human, in the pursuit of the climb.
Yeah.
Right. And so now I think I'm unwinding a bit of that and uprooting a little bit of that and all the things, and just processing a lot. And so my food and my identity, is who I am. I'm celebrated for the global flavors. I'm celebrated for sustainability and all of that, which is innate in me, because I think as how I'm wired, my grid system is always thinking about what is the common ground, what is the nucleus. I always want to like find the nucleus, and then and then I can figure it out from there. That's always my thing, and I'm learning about myself, in real time. So I think it made sense why I would be a chef. Yeah. So I think to your question, it's kind of been a push-pull. I've been rebellious in that, yes, I am a Black woman, But no, you're not going to make me cook shrimp and grits and all this, I trust me, I ate all that growing up, gumbos, all that. Like, I love it. But I just see too many Black chefs being pigeonholed into that. And it's like, I talked to Mark Samuelson about this a lot. He's an Ethiopian chef who's adopted by Swedish parents, born and raised, Sweden. And, I had him over for dinner the other night. We had this amazing conversation. It's just about identity and what is your identity and how do people see you as identity? Because I could walk into any venue and 9 times out of 10, people are going to walk past me and say, "Where's the chef?" And all the cooks go, "She's right there." Yeah. And I have to take it all in gratitude and humble and stride, So it's just, my legacy, right? Like, my responsibility is to try to educate constantly and try to be classy as I can about it. And also, speak up. I think I'm trying to find and use my voice a lot more these days, because I think in the French kitchens, they made me to feel that I didn't have an opinion or that I should make myself smaller, right? So I did that for a long time because that was the way,
Yeah, no, thank you, Nyesha. You mentioned it, and I had the privilege of being there, watching you compete.
You did. Thank you for coming.
The Bocuse d'Or. For those of you that don't know, I didn't really know much about it until somewhat recently. But the Bocuse d'Or, I think a simple way of explaining it, it's like the cooking Olympics, and it really is. It's a global competition of the best and brightest. The people behind it, of course, Paul Bocuse in Lyon, France. U.S. has a team. When Paul called up Thomas Keller and was like, "Hey, listen, the U.S. needs to show up," and so Thomas Keller and Danielle Boulud and all of this generation of chefs essentially trying to be at the absolute pinnacle of what fine dining is. And Nyesha was selected to compete, to become part of Team USA. And it's really something to watch, really a full day of cooking to present to the judges. Tell me a little bit about that experience, kind of the good, bad, and the ugly,
There's a lot of ugly behind the scenes.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I'll start from the large scope and kind of hone in.
Yeah.
Right. There was a moment in my self-awareness, gratitude, where I said, I can feel good about closing my fine dining chapter, because I did it. I did it. I represented. I was the only female. I was the only Black female in that room. When I looked into the eyes of Danielle Boulud and Thomas Keller, and I sauced that dish that I'd cooked 35 times. We were in Israel when I got the call from Gavin Kaysen, and he said, "You're one of 3 chefs in the entire nation chosen to compete to represent Team USA." I said, "Wow, what an honor!" And when other time in my life would I be able to dedicate 3 months of training? I mean, I moved my commis from Napa into my office, made a bedroom for him. He slept here. I'd go run the Santa Monica stairs in the morning, and I turned my living room into a test kitchen, and we'd train in the morning. We'd do all of our data analysis. What can we change here? Oh, we're taking 5 grams of, chicken liver out of this. We can shave off 30 seconds here. We built this data sheet that we had to execute the day of. And we lived and breathed that for 3 months straight. Nothing else mattered. I canceled every event I had. Supposed to go all around the world doing different stuff. And I pulled out of a few things because I had to do it for me. I've been in a lot of cooking competitions on the reality TV side, Top Chef, Food Network, Knife Fight, but this is like this is
a whole other level thing.
Yeah. So doing that was a personal journey for me, and it was a challenge, and I'm very stubborn in that I'm like, oh, what's the hardest thing? I can do it, and so that was that for me. And so okay, so that was the bright side. The dark side was that it consumed me, right? I had to become a very cold, square person with not a lot of layers and depth
I have to
and
say,
root.
Nyesha, I've seen a lot of game faces in my life, but the face you had during that day, I was like, oh man, she is in the zone.
Oh my gosh. It was a lot leading up to that. I
I
can't even
bet.
tell you. It was so challenging. Like
Yeah.
it would like the I was gonna say that it was the most challenging thing I've done in my adult life, but like it's been the most challenging thing I've done ever, I think. I've competed internationally in martial arts. I've played sports, soccer, softball growing up. I've painted, did this painting during quarantine. Um, Lots of things. I've run businesses. This was the most challenging thing I've done in my entire life.
Yeah.
Um, and I did it to say that I can do it, right? So when I'm on, my deathbed, not to be dark about it, I'll be proud of that moment, and I didn't do it alone. I had a lot of people around me, a team, um, who supported me, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without a lot of people who believed in me, and there are people who also said they believed in me who didn't show up, right? So I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about people, and I learned a lot just I was in a good mental place because in 2019 I really went on this like self journey, because I was cooking for 18 years straight since then, working in all these Michelin restaurants, like doing the things, sweeping the floors, running the business, signing the invoices, being the creative, coming up with dishes, smiling for the camera, doing the TV shows, did all that shit. And this was for me, and 2019, I pulled everything off the table and I traveled. I went to 6 different countries, and I did pop-ups all over the world: New Zealand, Israel, Hong Kong, Belize,
Amazing.
I let go of a lot, and I head into a different part of who I
Yeah.
am, more than just nose to the cutting board, which I've proven to myself now that I can do because I did it at the most elite level,
Truly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. I think that's a good segue. I'd love to, talk a little bit about travel, and the way that travel has played a role in your life. We can also, talk a little bit about your trip to Morocco with us, which is, by the way, I spent some time with it today. It just looks so lovely. Marrakesh, the Atlas Mountains, finishing in Fez, and Morocco is one of those places that I had such an idea. I mean, we're as we grow up, we hear about places, we read about places, we see these images, and Morocco, and I'll never forget landing in Marrakesh at night, dropping off my luggage, into my little riad, and then walking into the main square, the main plaza in Marrakesh, and just being blown away, like my imagination, being like over delivering, this intoxicating, the music, the snake charmers, the market, the suits. So it's just an extraordinary destination, and that absolute magic of Africa. And it's really just a really exciting, but really just to get a sense from you, I know you're such a traveler. So much of your expression on a plate comes from that global perspective, right? Being really rooted in California and the bounty of California, but then expressing, really through a global lens. Like, talk a little bit about the kind of travel, in your life, and how on a go forward basis, it's just something really important to you.
Yeah. The most memorable experience, I've always been enamored with the idea of traveling, and the idea that there's something bigger than just what is around me, that I can see. I feel like my parents always brought me up a in a in a very universal perspective of life. Like when we think about just Earth, there's so much more than we're talking about travel, obviously, on Earth. I'm not going to get too extraterrestrial with it, but like, you know, the idea that we have the ability to change our environments is beautiful, and experience a new people and experience a culture. You know, we're going to talk about these stories and share these stories with our friends, our family. They're going to tell these stories. Like we are storytelling people. This is what makes us beautiful, you know? So I remember when I moved to the Virgin Islands, that was like my first big move, 2008-ish. You know, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. My parents were like, what? You're like going to move out of California and go live in the West Indies? Like, you know, to my parents' generation, that's like, my dad's never been on a plane, you know, like 60 something years old. And it's like, he's fine with it, you know, but for me, I'm like, I don't know, I'm trying to get on a plane all the time. Like, not just safe to get on a plane, but just to experience, like, I love experience. I want to experience life, you know, like I value that greatly. And, you know, and so when I moved to the Virgin Islands, man, it was like, it was hard. It was bittersweet, you know, because I truly experienced new culture. I was coming out of fine dining. I was like little warrior Nyesha, and I had a new set of humans to understand. And these guys, like Island Time was like a real ass thing, you know. No, there was no black tile multi-million-dollar kitchens with the Maltini stove flew in from Italy, and no, there's like, you know, you're going to figure it out. And so, you know, your purveyor is not going to deliver you food today because it's raining. And, you know, so I had to be scrappy and learn a different set of life tools, you know. So that was my first experience kind of living overseas, and like I loved it, you know. I loved problem solving and you know, making connections. And there was this groundskeeper. I remember I was like, oh, I want to start a farm on property. I was at this restaurant in this bay. I remember the first day I was there, 15 years, 13 or so years ago, and 11 years ago. And the gentleman walked into the kitchen, sandy, bare feet, and he walked in and he's like, oh, this is my catch of the day. And he had all this amazing spiny lobster and sea urchin and laid it out on the table, and scallops and all these things. And I said, like, you know, well, and I'm like, guard is up. I'm like, oh, he sees this expat coming from, you know, the US, and he's like, this guy, he's like, you know. And I was like, oh, how much is this stuff? He's like, oh, you know, it's like $3-4 a pound. And it's like, this kind of stuff here in the States was like $20 a pound. And I was like, oh my God, like I am not in Kansas anymore, you know, like, yeah. And so those guys, people like that became my friends, and I'd go out on the boat and go day boat fishing with them. You know, Pilot Mike, this like just larger than life guy. We flew in his tiny plane that sat maybe 4 people. And I like, the images are burned into my eyeballs of seeing these clouds, like flying in the clouds, with seeing these silhouettes of like sunshine behind them that are just so magical, you know. And wonderful. Yeah, and not thinking twice about my passport, any of that shit, landing in the island and then trying to get back, and then being like, you can't do that. But Pilot Mike was like, knew someone. He's like, oh no, it's okay. And I was like, oh, it's okay. Like, it's like, okay.
Yeah, that's the magic of travel, right? And the serendipity and the way things unfold. And also, I'm such a believer like in the forcing function, right? Like you figure things out when you have to, and you're just, you know, putting in the realm of the possible to reinvent and reimagine, you know, and the context, right? And empathy that we build when we're out in the world, I think is so sorely needed.
That's huge.
What was it about Morocco that attracted you, of all of the places in the world that you could have traveled with us? What is it about Morocco that really captured your heart and your mind?
You know, honestly, I have just started to do more international travel. So I hadn't actually been to Africa, you know, so for me, that's bucket list. You know, I'd love to see more of it. And so I have had the pleasure to meet a lot of people from Morocco and surrounding areas, and you know, I think it's going to feed my soul in a way that is super inspiring, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think, you know, in terms of the spices, you know, and the markets and the tagines, and it's just such a, I think a culinary kind of vocabulary and pantheon that is such a good fit for your style. I think it's so
Are you
exciting to
kidding
think
me?
the meal that
Yes.
you're going to be able to cook there. And, you know, one of the afternoons of the trip, you know, we'll have a chance to go to the market and shop, and then come back and I'll cook together with you. And I think that's going to be, you know, absolutely delightful. You know, we've got about just a little less than 10 minutes. We would love to take time if anyone has any other questions that they would like
I
to ask.
hope so.
You know, we could certainly, I know we could keep on chatting here for a very long time. You know, there's a question here, and it's related a little bit to, similar. Actually, let's ask I think a simple question, but a good one, which is, what's one of your favorite dishes to cook? Do you have a kind of some go-to dishes that you just absolutely love cooking?
Yeah, I do actually. I used to not love that question, but then
Yeah.
I really started thinking about it, and I was like, well, what do I actually cook a lot? You know what is my thing is, it's kind of in one realm. I'm gonna say it's like stocks, soups, and braises. I really enjoy making things that can on the eye look like very humble dishes, but I think that these types of foods really hug our souls. Like anyone can like buy the caviar and the wagyu and the Kobe beef and the caviar, and like those are all great, right? And I've had my hands on all of that product all of my life, but to take a very humble ingredient and or vegetable, right? Like or stewing meat or what have you, and create something that can sustain many people and actually get better over time. I think that that is an artistry in itself. Like great stock making is an art. And one of my first culinary school teachers, Chef Chapman, he was this very weathered man, and he had these piercing blue eyes. He was a war veteran, and he was so passionate about stock making, and his passion now lives in me, and I'll never not ever look at stocks the way that man looked at stocks. Like it was like the love of his life, you know. And so
I love that.
yeah, and I love soups, I love stock making, I love braises. I really have a huge affinity towards braising things.
Braising, yeah. It's been wonderful to see too. I think, you know, with the social channels, the way that home cooks are now getting a chance to be the stars themselves, right? And take a real pride and inspiration for making these you know these the dishes, which I think has been a lot of fun to see. There's one more question here, and there's it's kind of a big question with a couple of pieces. Let me see if I can pull something out of it that's kind of what's your take on on individuals taking a step back from kitchens and food industry, especially in the pandemic, and this kind of idea, how can young people in the industry advocate for restaurants kind of in the climate to push for real change? And, you know, I think the restaurant has done, you know, I think frankly, a good job of convening and raising their hand up and saying, look, we really need help. And there's certainly a lot of, just a lot of knock-on effects for, you know, restaurants being such an important part of a local economy. So there's a lot there. I don't know, any, you know, top of mind thoughts.
Yeah, no, restaurants are a huge part of it. I mean, and it's so, you know, it's such a layered thing, because I think from the consumer standpoint, we're thinking about, you know, going to have lunch, going to have a cocktail, going to engage with people. Like so much of that was surrounded with the culture of a restaurant. And now that's been taken away from us. But it's all about the supply chain also. You know, it's the farmers, it's, you know, it's a lot of people, the dishwashers, the servers, you know, the front of the house people who are also affected. There's not a lot of support necessarily. There's starting to be more, because we're realizing as an industry, as I'm on a lot of these email chains and a lot of these groups. We're trying to pull up our bootstraps and do it for ourselves, because we're realizing that after, what is it, 9-11 months, that we're not getting a lot of relief.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of initiatives on the center of it happening, is one aspect. I think the obvious answer to that is to obviously support as much as we can with our dollars, and being intentional with our dollars and where we're putting those dollars at play. I think in terms of the first part of it, young people maybe coming up in the generation, how can we support the restaurant business and the culture and like all the things that go along with restaurants, right? It's a whole other social dynamic to the restaurant vertical. I think that the craft of food and storytelling will never go away. I think that we are in a flux progressive state right now, and I think two things. I think we're going to see a lot more fast casual restaurants come out of this and be successful. We already see that, like your Sweet Greens and like things like that are coming up. Chipotle's obviously been doing well. And then I think, I think that there'll be a lot more experiential, more intimate fine dining. If we're talking about fine dining, it's not these big, elaborate, huge overhead restaurants. When I walked to the kitchen of Danielle, like, it's a beast. There's a huge underbelly of an operation on top of an operation on top of an operation. It's like, just to sustain those, you need one entity. There's 5 entities coming out of that. And so they're just these huge, huge operations, and bless all of their hearts. I hope that they're all still around,
Sure. Yeah.
forever, of course.
Yeah.
But I think, this is what I think. I think that the food space is obviously changing. I think that social media has had a lot to do with it. Before, chefs are chefs, and like, we owned the food space. We were the people who donned the chef coat and the apron and said, we are the thought leaders. We are the people to talk about food. And now we have, I'm not naysaying, but we have whoever, Joe Schmo down the street, who puts on the apron and smiles for the camera and read a recipe and has the tattoos, and that person now, is selling croissants out of their home, whatever, like.
Sure.
And so there's a whole new realm and layers of business that we're seeing happening in real time. I get it. Like, I'm not naysaying entrepreneurs who are out there trying to make a buck. But it's just now there's such a wider lens. Before, chefs were get their write up in the LA Times, New York Times, people patron your restaurant, and that was it. You're done. Great. You get your stars.
The system was like tight.
Yeah.
We're going to go a couple minutes over. I think, if that's okay, we'll take one more question here, I think, and then we can kind of wrap up. Nyesha, and it's a question around, what advice would you give a teen, kind of approaching a career in the culinary arts? And the question's really around the idea of, like, do you recommend to be a chameleon, to go into this environment and just kind of fit in, which I think certainly was the requirements. I don't even think it was a choice, of you coming up, or now is it really the responsibility to speak up and to take care of others? Like, how do you think about that?
I'm going to give my honest answer, right? And based off of my life experience.
Of course.
I think it's very, very important to find like 3 mentors, not just one. I think you need someone who's going to teach you business. I think you need someone who's going to teach you. I think you should find someone who you want to be like, who you respect their food, and work for them, and then I think you need a like a life coach type person, someone to be empathetic and understand your woes too, because I think so much of what the industry teaches us is to be strong, to be so strong all the time. and like it's okay to not be strong sometimes, you know. And so I think that mentors are super important, you know, and I hope that that doesn't fall on deaf ears, because this is 18 years of in the industry talking and having had many mentors myself. I think that your mentor is going to help open doors for you,
Mhm.
because ultimately we're all in this for a reward. Like, and the reward is planting that seed in other people a lot of times, you know? So if we can go through all these things, grin and bear it, to give that to someone else to then plant seeds, grow a tree, eat the fruit, feed other people. Like that's the cycle.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Well, Nyesha, thank you so much for your generosity of spirit and your time. We love you so much. We are so excited about our trip to Morocco. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to modernadventure.com /Morocco with Nyesha, and you can learn more about joining this wonderful human on an adventure to that magical place. Thank you for everybody that tuned in. We really appreciate you being part of our community. Happy New Year, everybody. So exciting to be able to turn the page on 2020 and all the hope and promise that 2021 brings. Without a doubt, we will be back out in the world, exploring, discovering, and doing the things that we love. Until then, thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your night. Thank you. Bye.
Bless, bless.
Bless, bless. Bye, Nyesha. Thank you.
Bye, dear.